In this episode, we're talking to Frederick Van Johnson. Now, Frederick is the host and owner of TWiP. TWiP stands for This Week in Photography or This Week in Photo, and it is a podcast with hundreds of thousands of monthly downloads. Very popular. I'd highly suggest you guys check it out. But in this episode, we'll be talking about kind of how Frederick came to own and operate TWiP and what it is today. Now, part of this unique story begins with losing his job at Adobe. So it's a very unique experience. And around it, we talk about the subject of stability and creating something for yourself. We also end up talking quite a bit about the state of kind of overall social media and social media marketing. We talk about Frederick's experience in the United States Air Force, where he served for 8 years as a photojournalist, and a whole bunch more. So let's jump in. This is the TSS Podcast. It's a place for authentic conversations to uncover the stupid, simple truths that help us succeed in business, create better relationships, and lead more fulfilling lives. Welcome to Think Stupid Simple. Frederick, I'm lighting our ceremonial candles.
Nice.
This is my happy place, which I wonder if my happy place will...
lighting candles and having these kind of conversations in the middle of the day, man. This is a quiet storm conversation. This is like
cardigan,
11 p.m.
This is my giving up on life sweater on.
That's your dad's sweater.
This is my.
Did it come with a minivan?
it might as well had, because you don this thing and you better be married. You better be in a relationship. You better be good, because nothing's coming. No fish are biting after that. That's where I'm at with this. But you know what? It is the most comfortable thing in the world.
That's what they say about minivans.
I strongly disagree with the minivan notion. So, Frederick, I am so glad that you are joining me on the podcast. Frederick, you are known for many things, one of which is TWiP, This Week in Photography, which is your podcast.
It is.
Look at that. And like that, see, this is why I have help, Frederick, because Anthony just pulled up your website on his own. And I know that I love it. You do all this on your own. Typically, you're switching back and forth and stuff, but I'm just not as talented as you. And therefore,
you are. I require
some assistance.
If I could have assistance, my friend, I would be doing the exact same thing.
All right. So I would love to start and this conversation, Frederick, this is a broad audience platform. I think it's fun to talk about pretty much any and everything. So as far as my book, it's open. Nothing is off limits. Ask whatever you'd like. But what I would love to start chatting about was this idea for the TWiP podcast, because now it is, you told me that you guys get about 15,000 downloads per episode. It's about 2 episodes a week. Is that what you said?
Yeah. You roughly usually it's 2 episodes a week and one and content that's private. So yeah.
So that puts you guys at well over 100,000 downloads a month, which is quite successful as a podcast. So how does one launch a podcast? How does one think of TWiP?
Oh, man. So that's 2 different questions. So are you asking generically about launching a podcast? Or are you talking about how did TWiP evolve into its current state of being? 2 different things.
Let's do number 2 first. So let's first think of how did TWiP start and evolve to where it is?
So TWiP was started, man. We're over 10 years old now. The show is over crazy. 10 years old.
And TWiP, show is, I don't know if I've said it yet. It's This Week in Photography. So it's your photography podcast.
Yep. This Week in Photo. We shortened it like KFC.
Oh. You shortened it by taking off the graphy part. This Week in Photo.
Yeah. And by losing that meant I could get all the social handles. So it was an easy choice.
That's awesome.
So how did it start? I'll give you the 30,000 foot kind of Reader's Digest version of it. So TWiP was started, like I said, over a decade ago by 2 really good friends of mine, Alex Lindsay and Scott Bourne, whom I haven't talked to in forever. But those 2 guys started it as just an audio thing. It was kind of an experiment because Apple had just started talking about podcasts and, lending legitimacy to the podcasting platform / art form. So they just decided to start one. Remember, Alex Lindsay and Scott Bourne at the time were very kind of in the same Rat Pack with Leo Laporte in that crew from This Week in Tech and all that. So This Week in Photo was an offshoot of that, and kind of, like I said, a stepchild cousin type show. But it was audio only. There were very few listeners. There were no social channels. There was no website. There was nothing. It was just some guys putting up an audio file in an RSS feed. At the time when they started the show, I was working at Adobe. So I was on the Adobe marketing team for Lightroom and Photoshop. Adobe laid off about 800 people in one day, and I was in that school of fish that got escorted out. Yeah, it wasn't a fun day, but they
escorted you guys out. Is that a thing?
They didn't escort us.
Oh, okay. I was like, man, that's harsh.
Metaphorically.
Okay.
Metaphorically. But they did set up out processing tables, like triage units for you to kind of walk by and give your badge back and get your Cobra paperwork and, all that stuff. So
is kind of creepy. Yeah. Well, I guess if you have 800 people exiting, that's crazy. What led to 800 people being let go? That was the
.com implosion. That was that first kind of correction in the .com world. Lots of companies just went away, and Adobe just contracted,
shrunk by 800 people. How big of the workforce was that when that happened?
Geez, at the time, I don't know. I don't even know what the overall footprint of Adobe was at that time. I mean, it didn't cease operations, and it was still a multi-billion-dollar company, right? Yeah. So, it lost some people, but it was necessary. I don't know what the overall footprint was back then, though.
That's
multiples
crazy,
of 800, I'm sure.
So they put you in a line. If you've just been fired, please walk this way. Get your stuff, get your shiz, take your packet, GTFO. So that line happens after so here's how it went down. And many people in Silicon Valley can sympathize with this. So my schedule normally looked like literally Tetris with overlapping meetings and just anarchy all day. So it was just like, okay, what do I have to do next? And can I squeeze in some food somewhere? I wonder if I can, do I have time to get to the vending machine before this conference call starts? It was that kind of deal. And I was literally on my way to the next meeting when an urgent meeting popped up on my calendar. I think it was for like 1 p.m. or something. Popped up on the calendar with my boss in her office. And I was like, what is this? I had no idea. I'm like, what is this about? Something's coming up, or we're doing some kind of big promotion and she wants everybody together. You can guess what happened when I went in there. I went in there. First of all, I saw other people, like I knew something was up in the building. But when I went in there, HR was there and my boss is there sitting at her desk looking kind of nervous, It was like, oh man,
it was not good, and then it was to the out processing queue after that. So not fun, man. Not fun. Because I love that company. I still love Adobe. I love that company.
It's a good company with really great products. Very creative people that work there. I like it a lot, but I mean, it's crazy. I like hearing about these stories because I think when you, like we have this tendency to kind of disconnect from these events, and when we know like this is part of the .com bust and Frederick was part of one of those people that was let go, you kind of make the connection again that like, these ended opportunities are usually the opening of other doorways. So
it is. Yeah.
So this kind of opened up the opportunity for, because you also work with Apple, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. I was at Apple before Adobe. But this before Adobe. Yeah. When I left Adobe was kind of like, man, that was the, first of all, it was traumatic, right? Yeah. So the trauma was like, you think you're in a great relationship with somebody and then they break up with you,
discuss the relationship. Hey, let's talk.
We got to talk. So that's the stress level, and then on top of that, it was all your eggs in one basket bubble. You got a mortgage, you got car payment, you got responsibilities, you got all this stuff going on. And then suddenly you're like, the well is going to run dry in about 2 months here. So what do I do after that? So as part of that wound licking era.
Yeah.
It was, I remember, what did I do after that? Yeah, I remember I was just sort of thinking like, man, the mode of life that I'm in is dangerous. When you work in Silicon Valley and these beautiful, amazing companies with their awesome cafeterias and perks, and you get your free cell phone and expensive, all that stuff is great. But when it goes away, you're almost identityless after that. Because you go from being like me, I went from being, Frederick, he's the Adobe guy. He's the Adobe guy. He works in marketing over there. To after that, to zero identity, you know, and you can't, there's no kind of splitting them. So I tell people, friends that I have in tech still, I'm like, things have changed since then, obviously, with the advent of all these, this was like when social networking was just getting started, right? But so now you can relatively easily build your own personal brand. And I encourage people that are in that world, in the kind of comfortable world of Silicon Valley, high paychecks, but you're working from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., but you love it, that
For
world.
sure.
I encourage them to brand build, man, and don't make your brand inextricably linked to the company that you happen to be working for at the time. I instead suggest, why not operate, even if it's in your own head, operate as a general contractor, or the company that you're working for 9 to 5 is another contract. Absolutely. And you're the main brand, but they're a contract. You just happens to be a long-term open-ended contract, but it's a contract. And then bring other revenue streams online just in case that one dries up. You don't want to be in a submarine with one chamber, right?
For sure.
Multiple chambers that can flood in a catastrophe and you can still stay afloat. So that's what I did. And that was the advent of TWiP.
Yeah, that makes me think of this notion of stability. See, like my dad, he always talked about, he gave up kind of the dreams of, he wanted to go into a private, like kind of a private engineering route where he was more of an architect, more of an engineer, doing kind of fancy designs, right? And kind of really utilizing his engineering skill set. He was a civil engineer. And he ended up going a route which was with the government, which was under the Department of Transportation. So he worked for the Utah Department of Transportation, and he took that role. It paid obviously quite a bit less, but he took it because it was more stable. And so he would always talk to me about why he gave up this route for something that was more stable. And I kind of bought into it for quite a bit of time. I mean, I originally became an accountant of all things. I couldn't think of anything that was more stable than accounting. And my notion of stability changed when I saw my father basically implode because he hated where he worked, and the constant discrimination that he faced in Utah, this racial discrimination. Yeah. And he eventually kind of had a meltdown, like a mental health. I don't know what else to say other than just eventually one day his doctor said, "You have to retire early. You can't. You can no longer deal with the mental stress and anxiety that the job is bringing on." And then around that same time, I started working in accounting, and I was miserable. I hated it. And this notion of stability came back into my head, where I'm like, what is stable about a job that you hate? What's stable about always having a boss and being at a company? Like you said, this is probably the best way I can imagine. The best way I can think of working at corporate is exactly what you said. You think of yourself as a contractor who's temporarily working with a certain company, but to not allow that identity to be wrapped up in it. Yeah. Because when I left Ernst & Young to begin my kind of entrepreneurial life, it wasn't 2 months later that the next recession hit. You remember the mortgage crisis? So we had the dot-com bust, then we had the mortgage crisis. Yeah. So during the mortgage crisis, I had left to just start this company with my 2 business partners. All of us were Ernst & Young. Our peers laughed at us. Like, these 3 just left public accounting at one of the most prestigious firms to go and become photographers. What a bunch of asshats. I mean, that's like the notion that they had. Not
bird in the hand.
2 months later, half of them were laid off in the mortgage crisis. Just let go. You're done.
Yep.
And again, it solidified that notion of stability. I mean, you've learned that firsthand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, just to draw a circle around that, the other part of that faux stability, and not to disparage people that are working in corporate America. I did it for many decades. Awesome. Right. But you got to understand the beast, because I remember at Adobe, at Apple, many of the companies I work for, every quarter, especially around this time of year, as we record this, is this holidays, right? Usually at the end of the quarter, the layoffs start happening, and you don't know if you're going to be on the list or not. And it just kind of casts a shadow on the end of the year and the beginning of your next year, because am I going to get laid off at the end of the quarter? And it happened every quarter. There was usually some kind of, unless the company's like doing really well or whatever, then you're like, okay, layoffs are not an issue. But if it's not, which is more times than not in Silicon Valley, end of quarter, it's layoff times. Whose butt's getting kissed? Does your boss think you're worth it? Let me tap dance and, make sure he thinks I'm visible. Let me send some emails so I can get on some email. It was that. And it's just like the constant, we called it the guillotine. It's that constant guillotine every quarter, swinging back and forth.
It's almost like you're grabbing each other's heads, like, oh, nope, put your head out there. Nope, you're going to put your head out there.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It leads to corporate infighting. It leads to backstabbing and in the worst of situations. The best of it is ass kissing and all that stuff. It's just, it can get unfortunate, which is why, if like you were saying, if you shift your mindset into thinking of that company as more of a contract than I'm going to stay here for 50 years and get a gold watch type proposition.
Sure.
And then have other contracts also, be doing other things to generate income, so that it's not the end of the world if one of them goes away.
Yeah. I mean, and like you said earlier, it's not about, there's nothing wrong with corporate America. I mean, like, there's a lot of fantastic companies, a lot of wonderful jobs to be had, a lot of great careers to be built in corporate America. The problem that I have is this notion of faux stability. It's this notion of like, it really doesn't exist. It's fake. This idea of stability, because it's that idea of stability that prevents so many people from taking the leap and just doing whatever it is that they want to do, right? For my father, it was that notion of stability that prevented him from becoming and doing the kind of engineering work that he really wanted to do, from living his dreams. And eventually that notion of stability didn't even exist. He couldn't even maintain the job because of the stress and anxiety that it caused. And similarly, we get into these jobs and we think that it's stable, and it prevents us from going out and maybe trying something like going into business for ourselves, launching up a podcast, becoming a photographer, being an artist, doing music, whatever it might be. We think that we're safer when we go this corporate route. And that's something that I don't believe in, because I do believe the safest possible position that you can be in is being your own boss, whatever kind of boss that is. Once you have an income, I mean, you control the amount of income, you control the amount of work that you want to do. It's your decisions that are handling all of it. That to me is some form of stability. At least I can choose, versus like this, I think it's stable for me to work at another company. Like I said, do that and do what you said. Build yourself as a brand, no matter what you're doing, whether it's on your own, whether it's with somebody else, but building yourself as a brand. I think that's incredible advice. So you leave Adobe, and did TWiP kind of just fall into your lap? Like, what happened at that point?
Yeah, well, as the Adobe guy, I used to show up on the show from time to time. Alex or Scott would invite me. They were recording, I believe, in San Francisco at the time on Market. And they would invite me to come up, and they were doing it. This was none of this remote stuff, that we have now. It was drive from Cupertino up to San Francisco, find parking, run into the building, and sit down in front of the mic and record an episode, then go home or go for drinks after that. So we used to do that whenever they invited me up, which was, every month or a couple months or so.
And
I would go up.
Were you getting paid to go, or was this just for fun?
No, zero. Yeah, I was hanging out with friends. I would have done it anyway, right?
Yeah, that's how most podcasts are. Is you just bring people on and talk.
Yeah, there's no money.
There's no money.
Money. Yeah. So we just hang out and talk photography. And then once the layoff happened, so that was the MO before layoff. Post layoff, coincidentally at that time they were basically, I don't know, getting bored of the podcast, or it was, they basically, long story short, they gave it to me to take over and see if I wanted to do anything with it. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm not doing anything. I got laid off. So,
and they just handed it off to you, like, to just go?
Yeah.
It's yours.
Why don't you host it? Do what you want with it. Yeah. So I took it over. Over the course of several years, I built it up to what it is today, obviously. So I think it went from having, a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 listeners, and that was on a good month, to, where we are now, which is a kind of a tentacled beast with a tentacle in podcasting, one in community, another one in digital content sales, another one in membership, all that stuff. So all that has coalesced from that single strand or seed of just a nerdy podcast. So, and it still very much is a nerdy podcast, but it's a more mature one.
Well, I love getting nerdy about pretty much any and everything. So nerdy can be appreciated. So now you're doing 2 episodes a week, and you're filming this from your home primarily.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, this is one of the bedrooms in my house, and this is where I do it from. I could do the show pretty much from anywhere with a laptop. I've done episodes from a hotel room at Disneyland. I've done them from the road in Vietnam. I could do it wherever I am. This just happens to be where I have preset lights, camera, mic, all that stuff. So yeah, this is a home build operation, man.
So how long have you been talking primarily just about photography? I mean, how long has TWiP, as far as when you joined, what year was that? When you kind of took over?
So we're 2020 now. So yeah, I want to say when I started interacting with them, it was probably around 2008-ish, in that era. And then I took it over probably in 2010. So around the beginning.
10 years. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it might be longer. I may have the date skewed a little bit, because I got a message from one of my early interviews. Wasn't that early, but it was one of the early interviews. And she was like, yeah, we haven't spoken in 10 years. That last interview we did was 10 years ago.
Oh, man.
This woman named self-portrait artist named Rebecca Gudlifsdottir out of Iceland, out of Reykjavik. And she's like, yeah, I'm getting back into photography. A lot of the life stuff's happened. I want to re-age and be on the podcast. And I was like, 10 years? I had to look it up. And it was 10 years ago. She and I spoke.
That's crazy. What a
crazy.
Trip. Okay. So
yeah. Who knew?
You've been talking about photography for 10 years. That's one of the things that I'm curious about is, do you feel like you're still as passionate about photography after 10 years, or do you feel like there's other areas you want to start kind of clawing into?
Can it be both? Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely can be both.
Yeah, I'm still very much passionate about photography, but I look at photography as more of it's a baseline type word, photography. The word, if you break it apart, is recording light. So when you say I think photographers, if you call them photographers, tend to do themselves a disservice when they say I'm a photographer, because that's like, it implies that there's no art involved with it, because you're just recording light. That's it, recording light. So for me, I look at it more of, I want to move in the direction of evolving what I do with photography into more of fictional storytelling, let's call it. Right. So instead of, like photojournalism is telling real life stories through a series of images, right? That that impact the world and shed light on issues. This kind of thing that I'm talking about would be more akin to like Marvel.
Yeah.
Marvel has their cinematic universe, and within that cinematic universe, there's physics in that world. There's things that happen. There's different characters and stories and interactions, but they're all in that Marvel cinematic universe world. I want to build a similar cinematic universe, not on that scale, obviously, but for myself. And maybe it's just a kind of a mind personal dogma kind of thing where I build stories, short, narrative, short stories, visually narrative short stories within a world that are bound to a certain kind of physics and other realities that happen in that world. And it's all fictional. So the idea
you're talking about you want to photograph images of this, or you want to speak on this. What is the medium that you're talking about?
The ultimate medium is narrative fiction with a visual component. So that's the nugget of what it is. Narrative fiction with visual component. So to put it in English, it's a short story with an episodic short story with an image associated with it that illustrates what's going on in the short story.
Interesting.
And that image can be executed any number of ways because we're not limited to print and paper in 2 dimensions, whatever the visual that goes along with the story. So say it's episodic and you release these weekly, just throwing stuff out there. So the first week might be setting it up, might be a story or a photo with a written story underneath it. And maybe it's narrated. So I'll read the words and that goes along with the story. The next one might be better served with just text only. So that's that episode and people won't know what's coming until they get it. Right. And then the next one might have a cinematograph type thing in there because that makes sense for that particular arc of the story. So then you keep on and you basically end up with a season type implementation or body of work that tells a story from start to finish, but it's all, in this fictional world that you built.
That's very cool.
And it just, And I was thinking through it. So it's really interesting. I'm excited to start playing around with this because it could, when you look at it from an artistic standpoint, it just opens everything up. It's like, okay, this part of the story, I need to do this, this, and this. So you build it. But the other side of it is the marketing piece.
Yeah.
So if you look at, because basically now you're talking about taking what has been done with music in the music industry and the rollout back in the day when they used to roll out new groups and albums and the whole marketing blitz there, or movies, when how people anticipate movies coming out, or even episodic television like Mandalorian or something like that, where it's in a world, it's in the Mandalorian cinematic universe, but there's different stories that take place every episode with different characters and different art and the whole 9 yards. So you roll it out like that and build that anticipation. And now you have a lattice work to hang your work on, right? So instead of just planting a vine and seeing where it goes over time, you're actually putting a trellis in place for the vine to crawl on, your creative vine to crawl on. And you're giving it some constriction. So now it's not, hey, I'm going to go take a picture of a long exposure of a pier in black and white. Now you have a reason to go tell that part of the story. So it sort of, fulfills its own prophecy.
So from what I understand, you have TWiP as its own business. This is really completely separate from it. Now you're thinking about this as a separate this sounds like an episodic podcast, kind of like Serial, like Serial kind of follows that flow. I think it's only audio, but is that kind of what you're thinking of as a separate podcast? Kind of like that?
Yeah, but I'm thinking of the pod in this instance for this particular project. I'm looking at it as the podcast isn't the reason for doing it. The podcast is if it has a podcast component, that's just a way for you to find out about it. I would think of a podcast more like the Fear of the Living Dead, right? So when they had that, the Walking Dead, Fear of the Walking Dead, the Walking Dead series out, and then they did the after show where they'd analyze it and talk about what's his motivations. Well, he didn't kill him because this and that. That's the podcast form. That's the podcast for this particular project. It would analyze what the motivations for the piece were, and all that kind of stuff. So you can get pretty intricate with it. And you were talking about, like, the photography thing, and would I branch out from that? I don't see it as a, I'm tired of this thing, let me go do this thing. I see it as, I spent many years doing this thing. It's still exciting. It's still changing. How can we evolve that into something new and interesting to keep me engaged with it? Yeah. So, and here it is. I haven't shot a lot over the past couple of years for various reasons. This is one of the reasons why I would start shooting and being a creative or visual storyteller, because this is interesting to me. Going out and taking pictures of flowers or bumblebees pollinating a yellow flower against a green backdrop, that's beautiful, but I feel like it's been done. I want to try to do something that hasn't really been done to death yet, if that makes sense.
I have this theory among many theories, but one of them is that we all kind of go down this first creative path, usually because there's something in our minds that needs to get out, right? Now you might be at a job, you might be somewhere doing something you don't want to do, or you might just be jumping into it with 2 feet. But either way, there's some sort of creative itch that you have that has to get out in some form. Yeah. And then that creative itch turns into its own kind of living thing. Like for us, it became a photography studio, and then it became an educational arm, and then it became a resource arm. And what I found for myself, and I've asked this of quite a few people, is I found that as those animals kind of take shape and become sort of their own living creatures, this need to create kind of comes back up, because those things, they become like Lynn and Jirsa has its style of photography. It has its thing. It doesn't need me to go in there and sit there and play and tweak and refine. It's running as it is, and it's good. And SLR Lounge has its kind of formula for educational success, and Visual Flow has its kind of formula for, and inside of these living things now, there's boundaries that are created that prevent you from stepping outside of them and saying, I just want to go start anew. There's already a framework and a setup in place to just stick with. So every time I get to this place, I feel this need to do something new, to create something new, to get back to this. And it slowly creeps up, and it kind of starts as a little nag every now and then. And eventually it's a full on gorilla sitting on your shoulder. Like, when are you going to do this? And that's what it was for my book, The Stupid Simple Relationships, as well as this podcast, Think Stupid Simple. It just is this constant nag until 3 years ago. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start the process. But that's what it sounds like for you too. It's like you have TWiP. There's no reason to stop or to do anything else. But to the question that I asked, there is that other thing where you want to start exercising those creative muscles again and start building that new thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the outlet for it. And look, the TWiP world it's not a project that gets stale at all. There's always new people to talk to. There's always something different happening in the photography industry. There's always some new controversy to be indignant about, right? So there's always something going on to make a show about. The cool thing about this TWiP universe, that I'm building or put together, is that it is kind of like Legos, right? Mm-hmm. So like I said, it started with the podcast, but now, we bolt on the community and use the podcast to grow the community. And now the podcast is growing. So now there's an advertising component. So what does that look like? We got to learn A/B testing and all this. So there's always some new thing to obsess over and learn about and apply it to the project that is TWiP. And the cool thing about that piece of it is it's almost like the gamification of a business, because if you get this move right, money comes out. If you do this, no money comes out, right? So
it is. It kind of exciting.
How it works, right? Yeah. Well, you can do that in corporate, right? You could. Yeah, I remember I remember when I was at Apple way back in the day, of when a friend of mine who works there, Sal Segoyan was his name. He's the, I'm not sure if he's still there, but he was in charge of the whole Apple script world of the business. He's like the chief Apple script guy. He used to, speak at conferences, and they'd see him walk up and they'd be like, oh, Sal. Yeah. So he was that guy, the Apple script. He and I are really good friends. We fell out of touch since. I need to reach out to him, but when I was at Apple, we used to have lunch all the time and scheme different ideas of things that we could do with AppleScript that would blow the customers' minds. And one of the things we came up with, and I'm going somewhere with this. So one of the things we came up with was this, I mocked it up. It was this thing. I mocked it up. I drew it up and built the whole thing in Photoshop, built the UI. Sal wired it up with AppleScript on the back end. And we were going to present it as, this is something that we can make available for download to the users. And what it was a user interface to allow you to play music on other devices, right? So basically, long story short, what it ended up being was Apple already had CarPlay in the works. Yeah. And the Apple TV was deep into production, and we had no idea because Apple is so siloed and secretive. We had no idea. We're like, dude, what if people could watch and play music on their television? Wouldn't that be cool? Let's mock that up, right? Yeah. So we mocked it up, built the whole thing. It looked cool. And it was a project, right? So I had to pitch it to my boss at the time, and I was like, I want to do this. We already built the prototype. It's already ready to go. You know, this, and he was like, yeah, I'm going to need you to not do that.
That's hilarious. I mean, I can,
we were like, is it not a good idea or what? But he couldn't tell us, he just had to shoot it down. Right. But as an employee, you're just kind of like, okay, well, I tried, put it in a drawer. As an entrepreneur, I can run with that until it fails. Right.
For sure. So that's so interesting. I never thought about that as a company of that size, because Apple does encourage, like many good companies, encourage their people to innovate and present new ideas and that kind of stuff. But with a company that size, you have to be quite secretive about the products that are undergoing, to the point where the company's so large that their own people don't know what's going on. So like,
that's exactly.
It would be so helpful if you knew, but then
penalty of imprisonment. Right?
Yeah, it'd be so helpful to know before you spend the resources. But then at the same time, the more people that know, the more likely it is to get out. Like, what an interesting dilemma to kind of be stuck in.
Yeah. So you got all these smart people, well-paid people that I'm sure have a gazillion ideas, all these young, smart, well-paid people in Silicon Valley, but they're siloed and they can't really, for the most part, interact with different teams, and you can't do anything on your own, obviously, because you're an Apple person. So your identity is tied up with Apple, and you can't do anything by yourself or brand build for the most part, unless they've changed the rules. And then if you come up with some idea, it has to go through a gauntlet to even maybe see the hint of coming to fruition. So demoralizing. And at that point, you're kind of like, you know what? I'm just gonna. What are we launching next? iLife. Okay, so let's just make sure that's perfect.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I it's interesting because like you're right that as an entrepreneur you can run with those ideas. Although I will say, it's not necessarily always a great idea to run with those ideas. One of the benefits that I feel like of having business partners is I mean, Frederick, I can tell you of so many business ideas that I've thought of that would have bankrupted our company that we didn't do because of my two business partners. And at the same time, I can also say whenever I have new ideas and ideas that do turn into something, like, so most of our business lines, most of our product lines are kind of things that I've thought of, which Justin and Chris then give input on and guide. But as much as I've had, these good ideas, I've had a lot of really bad ones too. Yeah. And so having partners to kind of keep me focused has been one of those things that's been incredibly helpful. And to not go down the routes of like things that could be very bad. Yeah. You need that check, it's like, you got to have that gravity to keep you in orbit, right? So that makes sense. But you don't want so much that you're stifled, right? Sure. You don't feel like, even if I have this great idea,
what you describe is the ideal scenario where you ideate on something, you get passionate about it, and either smarter heads prevail or concur, and then you go on and do it. So you have that touch point of sanity in the flow. If you don't have that touch point of sanity, or there's a touch point but it's just a roadblock because of reasons, right?
For sure.
Then it becomes frustrating at that point. So, everything's your mileage may vary with this stuff.
Yeah, I've also found there's a certain time to kind of introduce ideas. Like, had I come to Justin, can you imagine like your business partner, you're in photography and education, and your business partner comes to you and is like, I want to write a book about relationships. Meanwhile, this business partner had just like gone through a divorce himself, and like, like what would you say to that person? Like, maybe you should just stay in your lane type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, or take some time off.
Yeah. Take some time off. Go and like reevaluate your decisions right now.
Go buy a Ferrari.
Yeah. So I wrote the book for years before really presenting anything. Like I wanted to have something finished because I didn't even know myself where this thing was going. And I think a lot of times our ideas never come into shape. They never take shape to what they can be because somebody close to us shoots it down before they have a vision of what it can be. Now, it's not that the person doesn't love you or respect you or whatever it is. It's that they can't see what you see. And I imagine that, like, had I come to Justin and Chris and been like, I got a relationship book, let me write it. That would have been one of those cases where like, they're not going to see the vision that I see. They're going to see somebody that like, okay, you need some time off, go relax, go do something else.
Yep.
So I feel like oftentimes we take these ideas and we share them too early. Like we don't let them grow into something, because what the book became after 2 years of working on it is dramatically different. 2 years into the writing process, what I had was good. And if you had compared it to what I first had, the idea and concept was completely different. And so as an entrepreneur, I find that there is benefit at certain times to keep things close to yourself, to protect an idea until you have an idea of the vision and what it can become. Then when you let it out into the world, it can stand scrutiny. You know what I mean? Like at that point, I know
exactly what you mean.
It's okay that other people criticize it.
The interesting side of that is, and I struggle with this a lot, and because I have a lot of energy, a lot of ideas, a lot of things that I want to get done, a lot of things that need to get done. So it's a full plate, right? So, but when I have a new idea about something, I struggle with, should I do the Pi Jersa and incubate this idea until it can stand at least wobbly, and then I'll tell people about it at that point? Or do I use other people as a mechanism to keep me enthusiastic about it, i.e., like working out? I told somebody that I was going to lose 10 pounds by the end of the quarter. So I got to be held accountable for that. Do you tell people so that they can hold you accountable to these goals and the idea that you had, so that they drive you and embarrass you into doing it? Or do you just do it?
Fat shamed by your friends?
Yeah, but if you do it, like in the case of a project, and do you incubate it to the point where it can walk? And then at that point, someone tells you that you were full of it because that's a bad idea, but now you've wasted all that time that it took to incubate it. Or do you tell them at the beginning where they can sabotage it and it never gets off the ground, right? So I struggle with that. I tend to not tell people stuff. I tend to, research and then reveal it after I feel reasonably, it's got a little bit of momentum, then I'll share a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach. I mean, what I would say is that the baseline, at least personally, that has worked well for me is when I have a vision and the idea is defensible, then it's worth sharing. Then it's worth like I know where it's going and I can defend its criticism. That's when it's ready to like tell others. But until then, I don't feel like I formulated the idea well enough myself to really know what it is. So if I share the idea, then it's going to get shot down real quick because nobody has a vision for it, including myself.
Yeah.
So that has been like a good guide for me. And when I presented my partners with this thing that was completely outside, I mean, you look on the surface, part of the book, like the very intro, I'm like, I have no business writing a relationship book, at least from your perspective, from the outside. Yeah. When you look in simply at who I am on paper, you would wonder why. But when I handed the book to them, then they were like, okay, this makes sense now, and it's something that we can stand behind. And I said, this is the plan. We're going to launch with this podcast. The podcast is going to be this research platform for future books. This book is called Stupid Simple Relationships. The podcast is called Think Stupid Simple. Future books are called Stupid Simple Sales, Stupid Simple Creativity, Stupid Simple, whatever subjects we want to tackle. And
love it.
This podcast is my place to be able to have authentic and fun conversations. It's really just to bring my friends on and be able to have it's to have an excuse to have fun, This is under the guise of productivity.
Really in person. This should be in person with beers or wine or something on leather furniture with cigars or something.
You got your beer. You can show it to me. I saw you before we recorded.
And tis the season for Corona, right?
So one of the things in photography, you mentioned that, you still are passionate about photography, and I'm curious. I know personally, I can say there's certain aspects of photography that I have lost passion for, and it's not so much the creative side. It's not the actual creation. I still love to create. What I've lost my passion for is the gear and the technology.
Yeah.
And the reason is that happening to you too?
Absolutely. It does. This new iPhone, normally, or years ago when a new iPhone came out, I'd be like, oh, I gotta go get that thing. I'm losing sleep because I gotta get a new iPhone. This one, I waited weeks before it came out. The only reason I upgraded was because the microphone on my old one was bad. Yeah. So, and it's like, I think as I mature, I can't speak for everyone, but as I mature, get smarter, get older, I start looking at the end result of things versus the vehicle to get there. It's the destination, not the car it's the party, not the car that you parked in the driveway, to get to the party. 100%. And with all these tools, I resent these tools that I have. Like, there's too much stuff, too many cameras, too many microphones, drones, all this stuff. I envy those people that I see that are living that minimalistic lifestyle with tiny homes and just happy as a clam with an eighth the crap that I have and still doing outstanding work but fulfilled and healthy and all that stuff. Right. So I look at that, I think, and I don't know if that's me evolving personally, or i.e. getting older, or if that is, just the zeitgeist of the time that we're in, where it's just too much, right? And it's just like
I mean, there's so much being sold to us. I'm with you. Like, my home, I'm trying to constantly I began this process of decluttering and removing about 4 years ago, and I was like, I'm so much happier with less things, and I still find that I have too much, and it's almost difficult at times to get rid of things that I want, because it's not easy to sell things used. So you have all this gear that you're like, man, it's worth something, but just finding the person to take it off my hands is difficult in and of itself. Yeah. So I was thinking about, I know Adorama has this trade-in program, and I was like, maybe we'll just send them all of our crap and just let them buy it, even though it's less than what, I could sell it for, but at least it's off our hands. But the other aspect of this, so I agree with you. I think as you age, I think as you grow in maturity, you start to realize that really it's the end result. Some people come to that realization earlier than others, but eventually you start to realize that it's really the creative components of this thing, and the gear is the tool to get you there. I think there's some truth to this. We're bombarded by so much that we're kind of pulling back to this minimalistic thing. The other thing that I would say is, at least one of the things for me, is every camera is good, man. I mean, you've got $200 and $300 lenses that are being released. I just tried some Samyang lenses, and this isn't a sponsored thing or anything, but Samyang makes these incredibly inexpensive photography lenses. And if you're not a photographer, let's say that you once were spending $2,000 on a lens. This thing is $300, $400, and it does a good job. Yeah. And so every camera, including your freaking phone, can now, if you have the right knowledge and skill set, it can take the photographs that you want. And because every piece of gear is good, it kind of, for me, reduces the excitement overall. It's not like 10 years ago where each new iteration was like clawing forward in progress. It's more like now it would be equivalent on the car scene, to now the baseline for a car is a Porsche 911. Everybody owns a Porsche 911 or better.
Yep.
Can you still remain excited about cars when everybody owns a Porsche 911 just as a baseline?
No. It's like, you remember the first Incredibles? Remember that movie, the animated? So you remember I don't know if you remember the villain, that kid in there. His evil scheme was to give everyone on the planet superpowers.
So
because when everyone has superpowers, no one is. Yeah. That's where we are.
Yeah.
Everyone's a photographer, so no one is.
I agree 100%. It kind of, so I still see there's a lot of photographers that geek out about lighting and about equipment and about technology. And I think technology is a broad enough subject. Like there's MKBHD, probably the biggest technology blogger of, this current generation.
Absolutely.
I think that's a broad enough scheme to kind of still remain excited, because you're seeing technology from the aspects of everything from automated vehicles to cameras to cinema to everything. That's exciting. But when it's limited to just the scope of photography and you're like, man, at this point, it's just about making things a little bit smaller, a little bit cheaper.
That's right.
And iterating slightly better.
And so, I did this thing, and I was doing this podcast project in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago. And some of the photographers, basically there was a bunch of photographers filing through. We're doing sort of roundtable interviews with them, and then drinking at night, right? So it was
That's just a given.
The thing that struck me about all these guys, these are commercial photographers and, real working pros, not hobbyists. This is what they do, and they're well known, and their work is just ridiculous, amazing. Resume a mile long, that kind of thing. And the one common thing that I took away from that, I still remember it to this day, was none of them obsessed about gear or cameras or software or light brands or any of that. It was the entire discussion was centered around the work and the story they were trying to tell with the work, not the paintbrush. It was about the painting and where they were going with it. And if the conversation did veer towards gear somehow, if I steered it there, it was more of, I really want to execute this thing, and this tool that I have doesn't let me do it. So I need a tool that's going to let me do this thing, not, oh my God, look at all this great camera gear that I have with stabilized sensors and all this stuff. Okay, now I have to go find something to shoot, right? So instead of that, it's the reverse. It's like, I have a problem that I need to solve. I need to find a tool to solve it for me. Yeah. So that's where I want to get to. And I remember, you can remember this. I used to shoot Nikon back in the day when I was in the Air Force. And all photographers did. Nikon had the Air Force contract. So I remember getting those gold and black boxes of new camera bodies and lenses. And you remember the feeling, like if Nikon, for example, released the new camera, the new F4S or something. It
used to be super exciting.
It was a thing. It was like, oh, this is amazing. You want to, coddle this beautiful piece of engineering. Same with Photoshop. Remember when Photoshop used to release not all the time? And it was like, oh, wow, Photoshop 3 shows up and they've got layers. This is amazing. It changed the world, right? It was like literally changing the world or how designers and photographers did stuff just with that one release. Now we don't really have anything like that because there's so much stuff out there, so many tools, so much good stuff, so many good cameras. We have our phones to do stuff. So it's hard for me, at least, it's hard for me to get really excited over something unless it's radically new. Like DJI shows up and releases these new drones that now you can take pictures from the sky. That's radical. But now even that, it's like, okay, another drone from DJI. DJI is smaller, great, but what else? So
no, it's 100% spot on. It's difficult to maintain that same level of excitement, and it's very interesting because this weird phenomenon happens more so in our industry than I feel like in others. But it's this idea, you'll see people stepping into the world of photography, and it doesn't matter like what they want to shoot. Maybe they want to do portraiture. Maybe they want to do fine art photography. Maybe they want to do weddings. Maybe they want to do landscape. But Frederick, what is the very first question everybody asks?
What camera should I buy?
Yes. What camera do I need to buy to get these results? That is the very first question. And people think in this industry that their inability to capture a good photograph, this is at least when they first enter the industry, right? They think when they enter photography that their inability to capture a good photograph has to do with the equipment that they're using. And I'm sitting here saying, no, down to your basic phone. That's what the whole premise of my TikTok and Instagram has become, is basically like, use anything with the right techniques and you will create professional level images. But sick. Nobody does this outside of photography. I mean, when was the last time you stepped onto a golf course and you're like, you know what? Just give me Tiger Woods clubs. If you give me Tiger Woods clubs, I'm gonna crush this. Like, that's what I need. Nobody walks into a jiu-jitsu gym and is like, hey, what gi does Nate Diaz wear? You get me the gi that he wears so I can, throw down like Nate Diaz. Yeah.
I would be Wolfgang Puck. So give me the knives that Wolfgang uses, to make his dish. If I had those knives and I had his oven, I could cook just like him, right?
Isn't it like you put it in any other context and it's completely asinine? Yeah. But in the realm of photography, somehow the marketing message has worked on the part of many of these camera companies who want people to believe that their camera would have them create the images of their dreams, basically.
Influencer marketing. That's, I was in marketing at these companies. That's 100% influencer affinity marketing, where Pi Jersa, if he shoots, here it is, the complexity of the camera industry is vast, right? Micro Four Thirds, APS-C, full frame, lenses, all this stuff. If I could just simplify it, I know Pi Jersa shoots with this stuff. I'm just going to buy that stuff because I want to shoot like he shoots. So I think that's the logic.
That is the logic.
If it's good enough for Pi Jersa, it's good enough for me. I can grow into it, right? Yeah. And go from there. Not understanding that maybe you could start slow and work up to Pi Jersa's level. Then you don't have to jump in with a bazooka when, a little cap gun will do. So
it's ironic on many, many levels. And one of them is also that I feel like, advertising, marketing, and influencer marketing just is so incredibly, I want to say unethical. Maybe that's a strong word, but it feels unethical. I had a Canon contract be presented to me a while back to become a Canon ambassador at some point. This was a few years back. And the first thing that I said, and the contract got removed as soon as I asked the question, because in the contract is that I can't shoot with any other brand of camera except for Canon, which includes cellular photography. And I said, it makes sense that you might not want me to shoot with other brands of dedicated cameras, but are you really that worried about me taking an iPhone picture and posting it online? And they said, yes, no iPhone picture. I go, that's a problem because I'm an educator and I want to remain authentic to the audience that I have. So I can't stand up on a podium and say I shoot Canon because it is the best. And this is literally what so many influencers, like I've heard Nikon ambassadors say it. I've heard Fuji ambassadors say it. I've heard Canon ambassadors. They stand up and they go, I shoot this because it's the best. And I'm like, it's a great camera. The guys next door have good cameras too. And it's really more about the person holding the camera. But the marketing has become so inauthentic, and it grinds against me, my friend. I don't know what to do about it.
There's not much you can do about it, because there's been blood spilled in the water, and you can't unspill the blood in the water. If these tech companies or camera companies or whatever know, if they do these 5 things, money comes out the other side. So they're going to do those 5 things as long as money's coming out the other side, and that's the sponsorship and these influencer programs. I hit the same wall because with Panasonic, and they sent me a very similar agreement where it was, you can only shoot Panasonic gear, or you can't use any competing products. And my first reaction was, everything is a competing product to Panasonic. They're in every single industry.
They're in video, they're in stills, they're in everything.
Yeah. So what I did was we went back and forth on the discussion, and we netted out as, I'm a podcast. I got to talk about 360. I got to talk about cell phone cameras, drones, all that stuff. So we can work together, and I'm going to shoot your cameras because I like your cameras. I like the bodies. I like the OS and all that. So I'm going to use your stuff, but I can't be precluded from talking negatively about it.
Yeah.
if you do something sideways, and B, I need to be able to talk about whatever gear I want. And my argument was that'll make me much more relatable, and it'll be much more of an honest kind of discussion, because it's not forced, and it's not, well, pay no attention to this camera that would be much better for this job. I shot it with this thing that's not quite up to the task, but it's the best camera out there, right?
Yeah.
So, it's more genuine. So, and it works out. I don't take any salary or any kind of payment for them at all, so it's more of I do it because I like doing it, and I like the cameras. I'm talking to you on a Panasonic camera right now. So,
well, it looks great.
I just use them because they're great.
Yeah. So that's fortunate for you that worked out. For me, the question was so insanely not okay that the contract was pulled. It was like, you have been blessed to have been approached for a Canon ambassadorship, and you are ungrateful. We will pull it away. This is what to me.
Walk out onto the desert, Pi Jirsa, and don't look back.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like if people in our industry, I feel like if people in general would just be a little bit more open, a little bit more honest about all of this, then it would be far better for everybody. Like if I was to say, look, sponsorships are not what it's cracked up to be. Like what people think of when they think of sponsorships? They think of, and this is like photographers, they're like, man, Michael Jordan made billions of dollars in Nike. Right. If I could just get Canon to be, if I could get Nikon to sponsor me, like game over. I want to make my millions of dollars. That's the notion, is like, and in most industries, first of all, people on major sports platforms, the reason why those sponsorships are so significant is because their audience and reach plays into the millions, if not hundreds of millions of people, because of broadcast television and the networks that are presenting their work, sports, right?
Yep.
But in our world where you are massive, if you have a 1 million person following, there's only so much budget there for a sponsorship. And we're talking like the biggest influencers, the biggest contracts, the biggest sponsorships are thousands of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but thousands of dollars. And if you do multiple things and you piece it together, you can kind of come up with a way to supplement your income.
Yeah.
But you're not, we think that these sponsorships are something far beyond what they actually are. And people fight over them. And in this fighting over, I want to be an ambassador, it kind of dilutes the whole thing. It kind of kills it all, because frankly, the companies should be paying their ambassadors and paying them decently. But so many people are willing to be called an ambassador just for the sake of being called it, that they'll do it for free.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I was approached by some folks from a different mirrorless camera company, and it was an interesting conversation with them because part of their stipulation or rules for having you come on board as one of their ambassadors, I forget what they call them, was that before the conversation with them had started, you had to be using their gear. So they weren't interested in converting people over to their platform. They wanted to see people that are using their gear and loving it, and then have those people come over. Otherwise, it was I forget the way they phrased it, but they get people that, say, yeah, I'll switch to your stuff. Just send me a couple boxes full of cameras and lenses, and Bob's your uncle, which is disingenuous. That reminds me of, remember we used to have trade shows? It is good, right? Yeah, that's good. And I respected that. I still respect them for that.
Yes.
Speaking of respect for the other side of it, so Photo Plus Expo, New York, a couple of years ago, I remember. I'm gonna redact the names from this. So there was a certain person that used to preach Nikon. Everything was black and gold. It was Nikon. You'd walk into one of those shows and Nikon has a big stage in there. This person's on stage with a crowd of, full house crowd in the booth. This person, if you cut them, they will bleed black and yellow because they are Nikon, black and gold. Yeah. And then one year I walk up and there's a Canon booth and here's this person at the Canon.
It is that ironic, dude. It is to that level where one year to the next, you'll see someone standing there and being like, I shoot Nikon because it's the best. And the next year they'll be like, I shoot Sony because it's the best. And you're
it's the best. My needs.
They're the best at, maybe putting a few $1,000s in your pocket, apparently. But that's it kind of kills me because people are willing to sell out. And let me clarify. The notion of selling out, by and large, is kind of a stupid idea. I mean,
yeah, get yours.
Like you should, if you are a musician, make the music that makes you happy, and you should, make money from it. And the more money you can make from that, the better.
Yeah.
But the notion of selling out holds some water when we're talking about, you love making folk music, but someone dangles, a pop fruit over your head and they're like, hey, if you'll put on a bikini and, do the little jingle jangle and dance around a little bit and make this into a pop song, and it's completely against who you are. Like, if you are pop, then by all means go that route. But when you do something that's completely against who you are, that's when I feel like you sold out.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin is it's usually more complex than that, right? So it's not just about the art. It could be that person that is selling out has a screaming baby at home that needs some sort of surgical treatment or something, and they don't have money for it, or they got a hungry family, or they were trying to pay for a wedding and they're like, well, I could shuck and jive over here and make 50 grand for a day's work. And pay for the wedding, or we could not have a wedding, right?
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, even then I still have a hard time of somebody doing something that goes against who they are.
Well, if it's fundamental, if it's, you and I have talked about the whole racism stuff and all that. If it's something egregious like that, I could see, of course, I'm not going to do that. We could just not get married, or we could save for a couple more years doing it, that kind of stuff. So if it's that kind of proposition where it's something that goes against your worldview, but if it's not that, if it's a matter of, I usually shoot in the landscapes and my family's hungry and they're asking me to shoot a wedding. I hate weddings, but they're asking me to shoot a wedding. I'm going to shoot a wedding, right?
I think the idea of selling out is mainly towards people who already have a particular success in one area, and then they just completely divert course. So it's like I don't think they'd be in that situation in the first place. But
I'm wondering. And Anthony, have you introduced yourself again?
I don't know.
This is Anthony.
Podcast. Hello.
Hello. Hello,
Disembodied
mates.
voice.
We always have Mike and Anthony, and they're supposed to chime in. We need to get them a camera so that we can actually see them. But every time Anthony chimes in, it's like this disembodied voice from somebody, and like nobody's talking, but God has stepped in.
I thought it was your conscience. I was like, wow, I can hear it
speaking to you. Yeah, like it can be that. I guess, like, I don't know. I know it's a pipe dream to sit there and to hope that if somebody says something is the best, that they truly believe that it is the best and the best choice, right? But if something is good, say that it's good. I shoot Canon because I enjoy their cameras. I like the colors that come out of the camera. It fits my needs. That is an honest statement versus I shoot Canon because it's the best. The best for what? The best for who?
Right. Exactly.
So my notion of kind of selling out is like this, the taking of money to do something that is just against things that you believe. Like that to me is what it is. It's not a musician who, kind of creates something that's a bit more popular, or maybe their style evolves, or it's not the photographer who's a landscape photographer, but it's like, I'm going to put money on the table by shooting weddings. It's more so if somebody is like, I would never shoot a wedding in a million years. And they claim to be, let's say that they claim, I'm a successful celebrity portrait photographer. I would never shoot a wedding. But then you find out on the down low that weddings are how they make their money.
Right.
That to me is selling out. That to me is like, you are not what you represent. You are not who you say you are. And I have an issue with that. And I think there's a lot of
the anti LGBTQ congressman that gets caught in a compromising position with the people he disenfranchised. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So,
precisely.
Same stuff. Yeah, man. Well, it's interesting. Who knows? I think physics is always at play, right? And it's always the path of least resistance. Like we started the conversation talking about the layoffs at Adobe and all that. I don't fault Adobe for any of that. It was just the ebb and flow of the industry and, path of least resistance. The path of least resistance to profitability or to making our shareholders happy is to show them all these, these bag of pink slips, right? So that'll make them happy. So same with this stuff. What's the path of least resistance to starting a business or to putting food on the table or to, building your personal brand? Is it quote selling out or is it not selling out? If you already have a personal brand, where are you trying to go? Right? If you're already got 1 million followers or a gazillion people following you, what's the next level for you? And is the next move that you're going to do the path of least resistance to that next move? It all guides. It's like water flowing downhill. It's going to find the easiest way to go. It's the same way in the opposite direction for us.
I guess so. I guess. I don't know that there's, you're right that it's kind of, in a sense, it's fighting physics, because I think you put enough money on the table and anybody's going to be an ambassador of anything. But I would like to think that people wouldn't, but physics, right? You got to put money on the table. You got to do what you got to do. Yeah. So I'm going to ask a question that kind of deviates a little bit. I'm curious, outside of the world of photography, what are your other hobbies and interests, and what are the things that kind of fulfill you?
Other than my daughter, because we were having this conversation earlier, right before I came in and sat down, and she's playing this "What's your favorite thing?" game, and everything I relate it back to her. She's like, "What kind of things do you like to do when you're not working?" Play with you. What do you like to eat? Anything you like to eat, so we're playing that game. So that's one of them, hanging out with my daughter. But yeah, my outside of this world, it's kind of blurry because I love, my job is my hobby. So I love photography. I love to travel when we could do that. Used to do that. I love cooking, drinking wine, long walks on the beach, Pidgers. Those kind of gaming, I have an Xbox and a PlayStation and a Switch. So I get into that every now and then.
Xbox and PlayStation and Switch.
And Switch, yeah.
I asked that because I'm curious, like which of these other areas. I do feel like there's a lot of people that throw themselves into one particular thing so deeply that they leave no room in their lives for anything else. And I find that those people to kind of tend to take on a very myopic view of the world as well as their own craft. Like I know people in the fitness industry that are so into fitness. Their entire lives revolve around the gym, around posting social media, and around creating fitness content that they can't no longer empathize with anything outside of that world. To them, it's unusual to not do the things that they're doing. And I find that they would be such better communicators, such better content creators if they had a little bit better kind of breadth to like what they take in. So I'm curious on your side, like what are those areas that kind of feed you?
You know what? That's a good question because I'm afraid that I don't have many. You know, I feel like
you just named a bunch.
Well, but there are none that I obsess over, right? I don't have any obsessive hobbies. Like when I'm not doing this, I can't wait to go get on my mountain bike and go find a hill, right? That should be one of my New Year's resolutions to become irrationally passionate about something other than this stuff.
Passionate. Is that what you hear from me? Is that what you hear me getting at right now?
That's what I heard.
Become irrationally passionate about something else. No, I feel like your daughter, and how old is your daughter, by the way?
She's 7.
She's 7. Okay. I have a 10-year-old, 2 7-year-olds, and a newborn. 7-year-olds are a ton of fun. They're all fun. Well, newborns are kind of fun. Let's be honest. They're super cute. How long can you really play with them? Like they just, sit around. But kids can be a really big stabilizing force and give you that perspective.
Yep.
Would you not think so?
I 100% agree with that. Before she showed up, my perspective, my worldview, the things that I care about, things I don't care about, the long-term view of Earth even shifted because things shift from crap. I'm in the twilight of my life. I'll be out of here before this planet goes up in flames. So let's party, right? And now it's. Okay, she's going to be here for a while and she's going to make people and they're going to be here for a while. So we need to make responsible decisions. It's like she even affects my business beyond just like she was just in here trying to get my attention. Beyond this kind of stuff, because it's the need to leave a legacy for someone and the need to like make sure that she's okay. She's going to whatever school she can get into. So that driving force is there versus, and this in spades, right? So that driving force of making sure she's okay is the shift from it just being the gamification of making money with an online business, right? So it's fun to make money and see it flow in and this and all that stuff happen and do different experiments. And the money in the bank is just, okay, whatever. That's the scorecard. Now it's more about, okay, we have these pretty fat goals that we need to hit by a certain time in order to make sure that she's okay when she needs to crack that nut. So
sure.
it's not a negative thing. I look at it. I feel like it makes me a better entrepreneur when there's real stakes in the game versus it just being a game, because if it's just me solo, I could eat ramen noodles for 3 months straight and still be okay. With a young human, you can't do that. So
you are not alone in that thought, man. I've heard many people talk about like, I was motivated before I had kids, but when I had kids, it changes the stakes of the game. I mean, you reach a next level of, okay, this is serious. I need to get down. I need to get cracking on these things. And like, if you thought you were doing a solid 40 hours a week beforehand, oh man, like once you have kids, you're leveling up. Not only are those 40 hours 10 times more productive, but then you're like, if I got to do 50 or 60 or 70 this week, I'm going to do it. So
yeah. Yeah, and it's forked too, because it's on the one hand, it's the monetary side of it. I got to make this money because we got to make sure everybody's okay, she's okay, etc. But then the other side of it is you're setting an example for this human who's patterning themselves after you and your work habits and all that. So you don't want to set bad examples of dad's a workaholic, he doesn't care about us, or dad never works and we're hungry, right? So,
yes. There is a balance. And everything.
Balance in there.
That word has become, I guess that word is kind of the. I feel like this has become the word of my lifetime is balance. I just talked about this recently, but that's essentially what I'm talking about right now. As I ask you your hobbies, your other interests, and those things, it's that balance. And I think what people don't realize is, you can remain hyper-focused in one thing, and for a short period of time, it might actually be beneficial. But in the long run, having a balanced approach is generally going to be far better. One of the things that recently has helped me just to, like, I like to consistently learn new things. Like I'm always picking up something new. 5 or 6 years ago, it was racing cars, and it was, I'm going to learn how to race cars, and then I want to learn how to teach it. And I went through that. And recently it's been, so last year pre-COVID, it was Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And this year, since jiu-jitsu is no longer doable right now, it's been cycling. Road cycling. And what I see every time I pick up a new interest and I approach something from this perspective of being brand new, it reminds me of how to teach and approach the subjects that I do teach about. So the places where I do education, this podcast, the book, our online education, everything like that. Sitting in jiu-jitsu and being like, I ask the dumbest questions, Frederick. I mean, we're in jiu-jitsu and like, can you imagine we're rolling around, you call it rolling, when two people are grappling. Have you ever done jiu-jitsu?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So imagine wrestling, but include submissions. So you can actually like submit somebody by basically making them tap before you choke them out or bust a limb. Okay. It's safer than that sounds, but that is what it is. So
it doesn't sound safe at all.
It's safer than it sounds. But one of the goals is to get on top of your opponent, and they call that mount. So where your opponent's back is on the ground and you're literally mounting them. And from that position, you can do a whole heck of a lot. You are completely in control. Now, here I am, and I'm going to have my jiu-jitsu instructor actually come into the podcast. He's coming in a week or so, because right now he's at UFC. He's in Las Vegas training for the next fight. He's training Cheeto. One of the fighters anyway, he's top level of his game. So here I am, a photographer on his mats. This guy's professional fighter. And I'm like, Professor, why do I want to be on top? I don't understand. Why do I want to be in mount position? And he's looking at me like, you have got to be joking me. Like, do you not see what's going on around you? Do you not understand why you want to be in that position? Like, but that is where I'm at. And so when I come back to the world of photography and somebody asks me a question like, what is RAW? What kind of lens should I buy to get this photograph? Then it like gives me perspective. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Because you're, in order to be able to explain something, you have to be able to teach it, right? And if you teach something, you understand it better intrinsically by trying to relate to the other person. You're talking about connecting with it, being able to understand what the other person is their needs are and where they are on their path, right? So in the case of mounting, which is
it's a fun word in and of itself. I could see you squirm a little bit when you said that word. That's nice.
Because I'm thinking of lens mounting. That's what I'm thinking of.
Sure you are, Frederick.
So in the case of mounting, I think it's a perfectly valid question from your standpoint, coming into it new, but from someone who's at the top of their game and has mounted many people before, it seems like it'd be fundamental. Just like, what camera should I buy? It's fundamental. How much money do you have? What are you shooting? Right. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And that's the perspective that gets lost when you are so deep into something that you can no longer see it from someone from the outside. Then you see questions as stupid. You see somebody else's lack of understanding as just incompetence. You see it as, and this is across the board. It's not as if this is just related to photography, right? We each become these specialists in different arenas. And then we put on our specialist glasses and we look at the rest of the world through those glasses. And that's where I feel like everybody is in such dire need of stepping outside of their specialties, outside of their comfort zone. Because I do feel like this is the crippling factor, not just in looking at other people in industries, but in looking at each other as a race of different people. We all see the world through the specialist glasses of our own race and our own experiences. Yep. And we don't step outside to see other perspectives, and we fail to realize that. So I don't know. It's one of those things that being new at something is always what has given me that sense of perspective and being grounded.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting situation because, like, when you and I had that conversation about race and all that, where it very much comes down to is worldview, experiences, nature, nurture, all that stuff, and the nut of it is perspective. How are you looking at, based on your experiences that have happened throughout your life? How are you perceiving this situation? Because you can only pull on the data that you've accumulated. So you pull on that data and assess what's going on in front of your face. If the data that you've accumulated is that thing is bad, then that's going to go, you're going to go on with that prejudice. Same with all this other stuff we're talking about. Even, it could be race, it could be photography technique, it could be weddings, like someone says, I tried to shoot a wedding once and failed, and the bride was mean and the in-laws this and all that stuff. So they have a negative experience when it comes to weddings. And now they spew that every time they see another wedding, right? That's being racist towards weddings, racist because you had a bad experience with a wedding.
What would that be?
Weddingist? I don't know.
You're a weddist. You're a generalist. You're a genreist.
Yeah. There you go.
You yourself have a very broad set of experiences that I find to be unique. I mean, very unique. I mean, your upbringing, where did you grow up, by the way?
I was born in Flint, Michigan, the place where they put lead in the water. But then grew up between upstate New York, Albany, and Chicago, downtown, South Side.
Okay. So. And then you went into the Air Force, right?
I did. Yep.
Yeah.
U.S. Air Force for 8 years, combat photojournalism.
That's crazy.
So I know my way around a photon and a pixel.
Okay. Well, now going there for just a moment, let's pause right there. What years were you serving as a photojournalist?
I went into the Air Force in 1989. The April of 1989, and I separated 8 years later on April 1st. And the reason I got out on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day, was because I needed to get out 3 months earlier to take earlier than my separation date. So I had to apply for special dispensation to do that. And the reason I needed that was because I had taken a job in Silicon Valley up here at the San Jose Mercury News. And they wanted me to start on a particular date. So I had to get out of the Air Force to be able to be up here and move up here and to start. My commander, the base commander, was like, no, actually it was the unit commander, but he was like, Yeah, I think you're making a mistake here. You've been in for 8 years. You're almost to the halfway point. You're staying for 20. You can retire. I think you should stay in. I think you're making a mistake. I know you're hell bent on doing this, because I had to write a letter saying why and all this. He's like, I know you're hell bent on doing this, so I'm going to give you the separation date a day earlier than you were asking for. And I'm going to make it for April 1st, because I think you're being foolish. And I want you to remember this day every year.
That's hilarious.
So every April 1st, I remember that separation day.
Well, so you were a photojournalist. I mean, during that time, that was during the Iran and then Iraq wars, right?
Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Yeah.
So were you deployed and out there shooting during those times?
I was the new green kid. So unfortunately / fortunately, I got to stay back on base at Yokota Air Base in Tokyo. So I was in Tokyo on base in the dark room. So the experienced at the time, remember, I'm the new guy. So the experienced photojournalists would be sending film back, E6, slide film, black and white, color, C41. So we would be the guys that would be processing, printing, and mounting slides all day. So I did that for like 6 months before I even got a chance to shoot anything real. But
what kind of images?
I'm really good in the dark room.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. What kind of images were you seeing?
Oh, everything. Most of it classified, but we think of it this way. The photographers that are embedded with other units, because the Air Force would send photographers and they would be from our unit that would be embedded with Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, et cetera. So you just be the guys there documenting, and you'd be also part of the team if crap started happening, put the camera down and shoot the other thing. But they would send stuff back from these deployments, and their mission was to document the entire life cycle of the deployment, including all the missions that happened on the deployment. So everything from loading the aircraft, pallets going in the aircraft, to the aircraft in flight. The aircraft has landed, you're unloading, you're setting up camp, you're going on patrols, you're doing this, you're doing that. Every little detail was a giant. That's why it was the photojournalists in that role were documenting the deployments. They'd also go out and document different things and missions that were happening as well. We would get all that back, and they would come back with different priority levels. I had a top secret security clearance, so I got to see everything. So all this stuff's coming in, we'd process, print it, wouldn't barely look at it, because we just, after the 750th print of the day, you're just like, okay, it looks like a picture.
Pass it on. Yeah,
that looks good. Going, is it time to change the fixer yet? I think we can make it to
more sand. sand, and more sand.
Exactly. And that's what it was. Yeah. So I did that for the first 2 years. And then I got orders back here, California, to Vandenberg Air Force Base, it's an Air Force base right on the coast, right along, it's about an hour north of Santa Barbara. It's like, if you look at a map of California, it kind of pokes out a little bit. That tip, 30 miles of that is military protected base, Air Force. And that's where we launch ICBM test launches. Tesla has launched some recently from there, but there's a number of missile silos on that base that they bring missileers from Montana and other parts of the country. That's where they train to press the button to launch their missiles. Wow. So we as photographers, they do test launches and all that. So we'd have to shoot that. We'd shoot space launches, because we had space launch complexes there. And they put a gazillion-dollar satellite on one of these Roman candles and light it off, and we'd have to take pictures of it. And we would, it's so interesting. So if you look at this, so scale, right? So this Corona imagine if this was a Titan space launch vehicle, right? So here's this Titan. The human is about that big next to it. Like that big standing. There's this giant American flag on there. So it's like that big. When we fly, when you photograph one of these launches, you're 3 miles away from the Corona, in an elliptical orbit. So you're orbiting, and they light it off 3 miles away. We're in a helicopter taking pictures. One time, the Titan, which at the time was the largest space launch vehicle second only to the space shuttle. So they launched this thing and it blows up above Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Oh man.
We're just kids, right? The two pilots, there's a pilot and co-pilot. We're in a UH-1, those classic, doors open helicopters. So we're hanging out with the doors open, shooting. The thing blows up. The two pilots are our age. I think everybody's probably around 23 or something like that. Right? So the two pilots say, "Oh crap!" Well, they said that, "Oh whatever," right? And they banked the aircraft. They banked the aircraft away from this giant ball of flame in the sky. We're in the air. It suddenly occurs to me that these two people with my life in their hands are nervous. The aircraft is banking, which, by the way, is full of aircraft fuel. There's a fire right there. The fire is so hot, Pi. It felt like if you put your face too close to the oven after you just open it, that
could
level
feel
of
it from that distance.
Heat, 3 miles. 3 miles. We felt that, right?
No, there was nobody on board of this rocket, right? This was just a
no. It was just a satellite. Yeah, just a satellite. It was an expensive satellite.
But 3 miles away, you can feel the blast still.
You can feel it. Yeah, you could feel it. It was uncomfortable. On the ground, I think it would have been uncomfortable. In the air is horrifying because you're like,
wow.
All the stress. The aircraft is listening. You got a lanyard, so you're attached to the aircraft. You're not going to fall out, but it's doing crazy stuff. This spectacle is happening over there. You got the headphones on, and all you hear is, "Holy shit!"
Dude.
People, but your job as the photographer, and there's a video guy sitting next to me with his big old camera, right? So we're in there doing the AV. That's the whole purpose of the flight. The mission is for us to keep shooting. So we're like, man, you get the knee-jerk reaction is to just grab yourself and close your eyes and hope you land. But we kept shooting. You got to keep shooting because there is no option to come back from that with no images, because that's the only images. And every shutter, every click of that shutter is, top secret.
Oh man.
top secret, everything you shoot. I never even got to see any of those shots because as soon as we landed, somebody came and took my film and everything. It's just gone.
Crazy.
I never saw it again.
So you never have access to the photographs that you actually captured then? Like these aren't, do you have any of those images?
Those launches. I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a bunch. But for those if an anomaly happens, then everything is classified. Everything has to go through the base public relations office at that point. So, and they're very locked down on everything at that point. If it's a non-classified launch, yeah, we take everything back to the lab and process and print and make an extra for me, all that stuff. So yeah, it's fun. I tell you, if you ever have the opportunity to go to like a SpaceX launch or something and photograph it, and it's at night, you'll understand the skill that it took to be in a moving helicopter shooting slide film at night of something that's brighter than the surface of the sun with no margin for errors or do-overs.
I can't imagine, dude. I can't imagine, not to mention the thing freaking blowing up while you're, oh my gosh. Was there a shockwave with that explosion that you felt hit the
I didn't
aircraft?
Feel it. I think the shockwave probably did hit the aircraft, but they had banked away and were moving in opposite direction by the time Yeah, it was so funny because it set half of the south base on fire. And it was just, crispy critters everywhere. They were trying to get away from burning rocket fuel,
man. I can't imagine the debris that would be sent everywhere from an explosion like that. That's why everybody's 3 miles away. I always find that people that are very easy and interesting to talk to have generally a very broad depth of experiences that allows them to kind of see the world from a very, again, magical word, balanced perspective. But you have that. Yeah. I mean, you took that experience, then you went to Apple at that point, right? Was it Apple? No, it was the newspaper.
Yeah, it was the Mercury News. Yeah.
And then it was to Apple and then to Adobe and.
Yep. There was a stop in between there. So it went from the Mercury News to Yahoo. So I was one of the first 500 employees at Yahoo.
Oh, crazy.
So back when Yahoo was like, I remember meetings at Yahoo where Jerry Yang and David Filo were thinking about, you know what, should we buy Disney? I think we should buy Disney.
Are you kidding me? They actually could have bought Disney at the time.
Oh, it was on the table. It was on the table. And they're like, well, yeah, because then we have ABC, we have the theme parks. And I remember they thought about it and didn't do it. And I don't have all the insight. I wasn't at that level, obviously, but the rumor is they didn't do it because they were a pure. This is when the internet was just getting traction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were all in on internet. They're like, yeah, that's old school stuff. What are you talking about? Theme parks and television and cable and movie studios? That's old school. We're new school. We're internet. We do everything online through the browser. So they didn't do it. Didn't buy Disney. They had the opportunity to buy eBay, turned it down, and built Yahoo Shopping instead. And when I was there, they contracted Yahoo Search out to Google. So Google was this little tiny annoying company up in Palo Alto, and Yahoo was this giant behemoth. And they're like, yeah, let's throw these guys a bone. You can power our search,
This is just a series of bad decisions, one after the next. Like any one of these decisions would have literally turned around that company.
Yes.
But they chose none of them.
None of them. And now they got bought for, chicken scraps by who? What was it? Whoever bought. I don't even know who bought them.
I can't remember who bought Yahoo.
Same people that bought AOL. Who is it? Verizon? Verizon bought them, right? Yeah, I think so. So
interesting. Now, and I've had you for quite a while, so I'm going to ask one last question here.
Sure.
But you were at the Mercury News. That was towards the tail end of really photojournalism as we kind of knew it, right? Wasn't that kind of what time period was that?
It was around the beginning, and so I'll test your geek skills. So when I was there, part of my purview at the Mercury News was multimedia and internet, and we had launched this property called Mercury Center,
mm-hmm.
and it was basically the online classifieds and the job thing we called Talent Scout. So there was a job board and all that stuff. There was the attempt to see the writing on the wall and pivot the newspaper in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Never did it completely successfully. But to timestamp it, one of the things that I had the honor of doing was getting rid of this old, I think it was called like a Media 100 edit bay
mm-hmm.
back then. So we got rid of that and replaced it with a brand new Bondi blue iMac with iMovie on it.
Oh, man.
So this is the era, like the year when Steve went back to Apple and launched the Bondi blue iMac.
Yeah.
So whenever that was, that's when I was there.
I'm trying to think of what year that was. Was that, I want to say 2000 and dude, Anthony, you got to find this. When was the Bondi Blue iMac released? I want to say 2004. Does that sound about right?
It does.
It says 1998.
Oh man, I was way
from 1998 to 2003.
1998 to 2003. Okay, so I'm a little bit outside of that window.
With the other colors in there, the Bondi blue and the strawberry, and it was interesting.
Yeah, photojournalism took a very interesting turn from, what was there was a lot of, I feel like, creative artistry in the photojournalist craft. It wasn't just, it was there's the classic saying, which is, what is it, like F7 and be there?
F8.
F8 and be there. This is a saying for photographers that's pretty much just like set these basic settings in your camera, F8, a relatively quick shutter speed, and just be there. Like be there when the thing is happening. That was the critical thing. So F8 and be there. But I felt like there was so much to photojournalism at the time, at least in the 80s and in the 90s. And then it sort of just became, if you got a phone and you're there, good enough. Like,
yeah.
And the erosion.
We saw that switch.
You saw that switch. Yeah. The erosion of the professional photojournalist kind of happened.
Over time, it wasn't instantaneous. It was, it was like, oh, wow, look at that nice iceberg. Maybe we should turn. Yeah, whatever.
We had time. This wasn't.
We should start turning to the left a little. If we start now, we can. But yeah, it was that time. One of the other nails in the coffin was, like I said, mobile phones. Remember, the Chicago Sun-Times was one of the first newspapers to kill their entire photojournalism department.
I remember that.
Equip their reporters with phones.
I remember that.
Capture phones. That's what people want to see. Remember that?
Yeah.
And now it's pervasive. So yeah. So now the traditional photojournalism, James knocked away, and those people that go on assignment and embed and come back with these ridiculous photos, ridiculous in a good way, photos, going extinct. That form of art form of photography and storytelling is going extinct. One of the other things that's killing it used to be back in the olden days that photographs were truthful, right? You knew if you had a print, you could tell if it'd been manipulated, but it was pretty much what happened then. Now there is no truth in photography. All pixels are subject to manipulation, and video and audio now. So the journalism and truthful part of photojournalism has been to some degree compromised. But on the other side, it's been expanded too, because now there are many more ways to tell stories and many more people that can hear and see those stories versus a single print. So I think the universe is shifty.
It's been eroded quite dramatically. I mean, just in general, this year's been particularly bad, but in general, our trust of the media has gone down. And I think by and large, due to photojournalistic integrity that's been lost, as well as just journalistic integrity that's been lost. Now it's put any it's kind of crazy because now we can look back at this and we can see it happening and unfolding so clearly. But today, you'll have, completely, like you said, you can manipulate a photograph, but now you have completely staged photojournalism where they'll tell people, stand in this spot, this is going to look best, light the fire this way, and they will stage a shot to tell a story, and that story isn't even real.
Yeah.
So that happens along with, and to me, this kind of began with the erosion of photojournalism itself and kind of the way that it's gone. Every reporter is handed the phone. They're not handed the journalistic integrity that goes along with it, the ethics and everything that goes along with it. And then on top of that, they're given this transformation into internet era where now your headlines have to be that much more captivating. The image has to be that much more punchy because there's so much media that we got to be able to grab people's attention in 10 seconds. And now everything just becomes clickbait. I mean, you're talking about major news sources that are putting out opinionated clickbait instead of reporting the news.
Yep. And that's where it is, back, I hate to sound like the old fogey, but yeah, back in my day, right? We had newspapers and we could trust them, and now, especially after the last 4 years and beyond, it's just like, you don't know who to trust. So now the onus is put on the viewer or the citizen to, like a whale, scoop up all the plankton that we can and then sort it out in the belly later and figure out what's real, right? So we can't trust CNN, we can't trust Fox, we can't trust MSNBC, we can't trust BBC, we can't trust anybody. So what you got to do is kind of get your information from all of them and read through the tea leaves and use your own common sense. But even then, like we were talking about before, it's tainted by worldview. So you get all these stories in, you kind of digest them to try to figure out what's true. And now you overlay your own biases and prejudices and worldview on top of that data, and you're going to come to a different conclusion than the guy next to you would. So it's tough. It's a tough situation to how do you live on a planet where you don't really know what's going on and what's going to hurt you until it's too late? Right? Even some of the stuff that's going on now, we're not going to know for years. There's going to be a news story in 2025. This politician did this, and this, and did these secret deals with these governments and all this stuff. We're going to hear all that stuff's going to come out, where today we're living in it and it's affecting us real time, but we don't know what's going on. So that breeds for me at least, a feeling of helplessness and just like, okay, I'm just going to do my thing, try to keep my head above water, and hopefully the universe will sort everything out in the end, because I can't tell what's going on. So yeah, the whole thing's interesting.
It's such an unusual time, and a huge part of this is, 20 years ago, you pretty much had to be kind of a major network to have a lot of sway. You're either a major network or maybe a major website to have a lot of like informational sway. So information that generally went through those sources was vetted by multiple people and places. But now what websites and CNN and Fox and everybody, what they now have to compete with is the massive amounts of social media influencers who they themselves control networks of their own. I mean, how many influencers have 10, 20, 30, 40 million people that listen to them? And each of these individuals is completely beholden to primarily their own viewpoints and whoever's willing to give them money. And so they're
a lot of money.
Yes, a good amount of money. And so now, not only from the aspect of like just in the sheer volume of content that's going out, the news agencies are trying to compete. They have to compete in this sea. And so I kind of understand it, but to a point, if something is going to be called news, there has to be some sort of a law that it must maintain its journalistic integrity. Otherwise, don't call it the news. It shouldn't be called Fox News. It should be called Fox Opinions. It should be called, something else, not news. Because there's certain words that I feel like
doesn't matter though. They call it, like, using the example of Fox News. So Fox News, they purport to be a news gathering / reporting organization. However, when one of their more famous hosts, Tucker Carlson, had to go to court for something a while back, he and the other guy, Alex Jones, said the same thing. So Tucker Carlson's lawyer argued that people should not take what he says on air seriously because it is meant to be entertainment and satire.
What?
This is in court proceedings. This is Fox News with an N in the name of the company. Then he was getting trouble for something. I forget what it was, but their argument was, well, you can't take this seriously because he doesn't say anything. He's not serious about anything he says. But
that's the most insane
elections. Yeah.
This is the issue with, Anthony and I were talking about this, is words are losing their meaning because we're completely deviating, in an era where like everything is being given these highly polarizing titles because, hey, it's hard to get each other's attention. So we need to give everything a crazy name. Otherwise, nobody's going to listen to this. It's not sexual harassment anymore. It's sexual assault. Well, those are two different things. Harassment versus assault are two different things. And both of them are absolutely horrible, but they're different things. Like you can't mix those words. And at the same time, if someone's going to call something news, it blows my mind that there's no form of regulation behind what there's regulation in potato chips. Here's a little fun fact for you. Do you know that Pringles was sued by the Potato Chip Association of America, whatever their association was? I don't know. Someone's going to correct me on this. All the potato chip makers got together, and we're talking like Lay's and whatever other companies that owns all. Lay's might actually own Pringles, who knows? But a bunch of these companies got together and they went after Pringles in a lawsuit that said, Pringles, you may not call your product a potato chip because it was never made out of whole potatoes. Now, this completely ridiculous, lawsuit ends up winning in the favor of the Potato Chip Association. And the whole reason that they went after Pringles was so that Pringles could not be located in the same aisle as potato chips, or at least not in the same section. So when something says potato chips, it has to be made from whole potatoes. Now, you can test me on this. I want you to go, next time you're at the grocery store, I want you to go and look for Pringles And you'll find that Pringles are actually located in the snack section, not where it's the potato chip aisle is usually somewhere in there, but it's where the snacks are.
All right, I'm going to take a picture. All right, so
You're going to go and look at this and take a picture. Now, if Pringles can lose this lawsuit because their product must contain, like, if we care this much about goddamn potato chips that we have to clarify Pringles are not potato chips, they're a potato snack, then why do we not care about our freaking English language and the way that we're interpreting things like news? I don't know, man. Maybe potato chips are more important than news, but I'm going to be the one that's going to say like news is a little bit more important than, where exactly I locate my potato chips.
I think it's just giving the power. Who are you going to give the power to define what news is and what news isn't? It's just, we don't want to give that power to anybody, really. It needs to be just
right.
That to me is the responsibility of government. I mean, we don't need, like, the entire purpose to me of a governing body is to make decisions in an unbiased manner that are not favorable to any one particular organization, but instead level the playing field.
Yep.
That our government should be focused on one thing: leveling the playing field.
Yeah, they should be loyal to the republic for which it stands, right? So,
yes.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, at least potato chips are, they're safely categorized. Pringles is safely categorized. Meanwhile, Fox News and CNN, you don't really know if it's news or not.
We have no idea. I mean, it's entertainment. That's what it's supposed to be. Entertainment. Yeah. It's like juggling with knives. It's entertaining, but it's a little dangerous too.
It's a little dangerous. And if you were to juggle with knives, you wouldn't ask yourself 5 years from now, man, it's weird that I got all these cuts on my hand. Is that not weird?
Exactly.
It's kind of weird.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Man, I used to have 10 fingers. I don't know what happened.
This is the present state of things. So,
yeah,
my friend, I appreciate you coming on. Anthony, why don't you pull up TWiP? Let's show everybody Frederick's awesome website. This Week in Photo. You have an entire community. You have the podcast. We were actually in talks about making This Week in Photo the official podcast of SR Lounge. Is that still happening, my friend? Is that happening?
That is still happening. That is still happening. In fact, I have our first pilot episodes of our wedding discussions sitting in front of me in a folder on my desktop that need to be published. So
look at you.
Oh yeah. That's happening, man. That's a 2021 fresh start. Let's kick this year's ass and say goodbye to 2020 thing.
I love it. So you can actually look forward then to seeing TWiP on slrlounge.com. We're going to be featuring Frederick's podcast. It's still going to be TWiP. It's still going to be all Frederick, but we get to bring a little bit of extra attention to it, which we're really excited about. And in the meantime, subscribe to it. And you might just see me on there from time to time, and you might see Frederick here from time to time. So thank you, brother, for joining me.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Happy to talk about rocket launches, cameras, anything. So whenever you need me, I'm there.
All right, brother. We'll chat more soon.
All right. Take care.